So good morning, Daniel. I think the first thing which we do is let's look at the specification of the unit. Now we are looking at this first unit, which is Introduction to Business. Now this particular unit has been, designed and introduced in the course specifically because at any stage when you look at doing and progressing further to a business or a management qualification, some of the contents of this unit will form the foundation of what you will study at higher levels. So here, the basic criteria, of how a business is set up, the classification of business, what are the legal requirements of the business, to set up a company or an organization or a limited company in a different, in different countries, according to the legislation and legal requirements have been discussed. The other bit that we will also do is to understand once you form a legal entity, which is to look at, forming or starting a business, how do you differentiate between the different types of companies? You look at public sector company, you look at private limited company, and within the private limited company, you will have, sole trader, partnership, you'll have limited company, limited liability company. And when you look at public sector, you have public, you have PLC, which is public limited, corporation. You also look at other types of companies, which are charities, non-government organizations, which work within, for charitable causes or causes which are for the greater good of humanity. Their main aim is not to make profit. So we will understand this classification. After you understood the classification, how the company formation is done, what are the legal requirements, how do you differentiate between a private limited and a public limited company, or a private limited company and a charity or a non-voluntary organization, we move further into the unit to understand how businesses are organized. So here, what we look at is, when I say how businesses are organized, here we are looking at basically understanding, things like the structure of the organization, who are the key stakeholders. So when we talk about, structure of the organization, sometimes we look at, whether the company is structured from a point of view of, their mission and vision. What is their mission? Now, if it's set up as a charity, if it's set up as a non-voluntary organization, or if it works not for creating profits, then the business objectives of the organization can be different. So if you look at a public limited company, the public limited company, or a limited company for that sake, let's put it this way. Excuse me, a limited company, when you look at it this way, you see that these companies are formed for making profit. So they will sell products and services in the market. And what these companies would, at the end of the day, do is when they sell their product or service, what will happen is that when consumers buy it, they will be exchanging, some money, and the company will actually be looking at, making profit. Now, sometimes we also look at companies which are set up for charitable causes. So we look at lots of charities across the globe. In the UK, there is a charity called Oxfam, and that is a charity which works mostly in about 120 countries. It has its objectives, yearly or annual objectives, are set by the UK government, because UK government is the biggest funder for that charity, and that charity draws in excess of about 150 million from the UK government. So they work with local international agencies to provide, aid work, or to provide, voluntary work, voluntary workers in general across the globe, in order to, do greater good for humanity. One of the things that they work on is, say, providing clean and safe drinking water in some of the African countries. They look at working with a lot of agencies internationally to look at poverty alleviation. That means people who are in poverty, they work with agencies to make sure that these people have livelihood, and that is across all countries. When we look at, the flooding which happened from Hurricane Katrina a couple of years back in the US and in the Caribbean, Oxfam was involved in rebuilding and redevelopment of some of the infrastructure in the islands. And this is obviously, the social benefit which the charity carries, in order to ensure that, it is able to help in the rebuilding of, maybe the housing infrastructure in some locations. Now, so what we want to do in learning outcome 2 primarily is to understand, what are the objectives of the business. So when you form a company, when you start a business, when you start an organization, you have an overarching objective. So if you look at a university their main objective is to primarily look at providing, education, affordable education. But when we say education, it is education, which is whether then we start looking at getting into or dipping into smaller objectives, whether it's further education, higher education, whether it's affordable education, whether it's education related to research. So different types of objectives can then be firmed up. Now, in this, we also want to understand who are the major stakeholders in the business. Now, when I talk about stakeholders, stakeholders are people who have vested interests in the business. So when I say stakeholders, stakeholders could be type of, employees. Employees are one type of stakeholder. You look at the management, the stakeholder. You look at bank, for example, or financial institutions, they could be stakeholders because they provided maybe working capital or loans to the company to be able to set up the business. You look at partners, you look at suppliers, you look at government, which could be, providing legislation and law, which sets the policy. Every company which does operation has to actually, follow that. So here in learning outcome 2, in task 2.2, we have to talk about and understand, maybe do a table. But the main understanding is that we want to understand what are the different types of stakeholders in the company. So stakeholders are employees, suppliers, partners, government. It could be financial institutions. It could be, when I say financial institution, it could be bank. And in some cases, the stakeholder is also the board. That means it is not the employee, but the management in that company which owns share in that company is an important stakeholder because they set a long-term plan of where the company would go or what kind of goals it would achieve, and how it would go out achieving those goals. And then what we also need to look at is broadly understand different types of structure, of the organization. So when I say different type of structure, what we mean is if you have a small company, you generally see that there is a flat structure. That means the MD or the employees within the organization have direct access to the managing director or the CEO. But as the organization begins to grow, what you will see is that there will be a layered structure which will start to appear, or a hierarchical structure, as I call it. That means if you are a sales executive, you'll report into a manager will report into a general manager, and a general manager will then report into, the managing director. Similarly, if you look at any department like accounts, you might just have one person managing accounts, payroll, everything. But at some stage when the company begins to grow, you will see that somebody in the company would actually manage payroll, somebody would manage day-to-day accounting, banking, somebody would then manage taxation, and at some stage somebody manages, other areas in the business, which is to look at creating accounts, submission of accounts, submission of, taxation, payroll, those kind of things. So there are different types of structures which are possible within an organization depending on the scale of operation and the type of products and services it sells, and in some cases also where all they are geographically present. So there are 4 or 5 broad structures that you have to study here, and these broad structures typically include structures like a flat structure, hierarchical structure, functional structure, divisional structure, and then the last one, which is a matrix structure. Now, hierarchical is quite clear. You have a hierarchy for people reporting to somebody else, then reporting to somebody else. Hierarchical structure can also be a different, this is of one type. Then the other type would be functional. Now, if you look at a company like Apple, you look at a company like Microsoft, you look at some of the companies which externally structure themselves on the basis of the products and services they sell. So if you look at Microsoft in particular, and you look at Microsoft's website, if I show you Microsoft's website, what you will see is that the company is not structured into, when you see the website, what you get is an idea that the company is trying to organize itself on the basis of products. So here you see Office, Windows, Surface, Xbox, and support. So what does this show? That the company is trying to structure itself on the basis of something called functions. That means of products and services themselves. So Office is a big division within Microsoft. Now within the Office, so externally what we see is this organization as being structured as something called functionally. That means they want to be seen in the market that if you want to choose a product, you look at contacting that particular department, and that would be, how the organization is structured. Now, under this structure, under these 5 broad types, when we look at they will still have somebody who's the president of office operations. You'll have somebody who's the there'll be number of vice presidents, and then there'll be somebody who will be general manager. Underneath that, there's a structure of accounts, finance department, production, engineering. So, but it's a self-contained structure. If I look at Apple, for example, some of the big companies, again, when I look at it's organized on the basis of products: Mac, iPad, iPhone, watch, TV. Now, if I go into an organization like in the UK, Tesco, you will see that Tesco is primarily, again, organized on the basis of products and services. But because their products and services are so huge, it's a distributor, it's a retailer. What they've still done is they've tried to provide a structure or external classification on the basis of types of products and services they sell. So here there's a categorization happening of the products and services. Now within groceries, if I click, there'll be so many different types of groceries. Within clothing, if I go, there's so many different types. Within bank, so what they've done is this is being done on the basis of a combination of function, but also a combination of something called divisions. So banking is one division in Tesco. Mobile phone, telecom is one division in Tesco. Grocery, clothing, they're all individual divisions. So what you see is this type of structure is divisional structure. Now, if I have to do a quick search of organizational structures, I'm not going to, because we are doing a bit of a tutorial session. So I don't need to refer to any notes because I've been teaching this for a number of years. What I want to be able to show you is to cover how to look at the whole content. Now, if I do a quick search, there are 4 types of structures or 5 types that we normally see. And when we see this type of structure, this is a divisional structure, because here you will see you have the head of the organization, but if you see each division will have its own functions: market, sales, engineering, operations, things like that. But this could be one division like banking, this could be one division which is like telecom, this could be one division like clothing, and this becomes a divisional structure. Now, if you look at hierarchical structure, this is like a hierarchical structure. So you have the director, you have a manager, you have a number of team leaders, then you have under team leaders, number of supervisors, and under that number of operatives. So this is one small organization, but one type of function which they are doing, and that's why you see this is a hierarchical structure. Now, if I show you something like a matrix structure, what I want to do is basically show you that it will be a combination of everything. So here, what will you find is that you'll have a function, you'll have the department, you'll also have something which is related to, different types of functions being done, but at the same time, each of the function might be independent, and that's why what you see is that there is a coloration applied across. So the chief executive is on the top, then you have the board on the top, and then you have divisional structure, divisional managers which are given here. Then there are different types of functions, and that's why they've done it in different color. So when we look at structure of the organization, what we want to be able to do is understand these 5 broad types, and that will help you understand when you work as a manager, when you work within a company, you understand these structures, and how the structure actually also shapes the culture of the organization. If you see a hierarchical structure, which is normally in large companies, you will see Japanese companies, the Korean companies, they had a hierarchical structure when they started off. So the internal working of the company is dictated by the top-down approach. But when you look at functional structure here, there's a lot of delegation, a lot of autonomy in terms of the people who work within that structure, because they are able to take decisions which are important for the better functioning of the business. And they go back to the management in order to ensure that these decisions, have some sort of an executive sponsor. And that is where that kind of, structure works quite well. Most American companies, have some sort of a functional structure as against to hierarchical, or, I would say as against a hierarchical or a divisional structure. But large organizations could have combinations of different structures, and that is why sometimes you have to look at having a broad understanding that how the organization is structured. And when I say structured, means how do you see the structure of the organization or the people working at different levels. When I say junior management, middle management, senior management, frontline staff, you need to understand it from a point of view of structure. Now, in the last learning outcome, which is of this particular unit, here we want to understand what are the interrelationships between organization. So to a certain extent, what we want to understand is when you work within a business, or when you start a business, when you work or start an organization, what we want to understand in this is what are the factors which affect the working of the business. Now, there are some factors which are going to affect your business from inside. And when you say from inside, this could be I'm short of cash, or say for example, internal factors could be an employee has left. Internal factor could be that there is some sort of a major emergency which has been created because of maybe a strike. Now, why they are internal to the business? Because of the fact, can you think of reasons why they are internal to the business?
Or the fact?
The reason why these factors are internal to the business is because it is only affecting that business or that organization. It is not affecting any other company in that area or any other type of company or business within the same side of products and services. So if in a warehouse, for example, there's a bit of fire now, and that warehouse is owned by Tesco, but if the fire destroys some of the inventory, so only Tesco is affected. That's an internal factor. That is, there is a lapse of security, or maybe not enough measures on fire and security were implemented, and that's why it led to the loss of inventory. But that does not affect the operations of Asda, Walmart, Sainsbury, or any other kind of retailer, because this thing which has happened is totally internal to the business. Now, if you have some employees leaving the company, or if there is a strike within an organization because of pay or any other issue, then that is affecting something which is only that organization, and it has no bearing, from an external perspective that maybe, the operations of other companies are affected. No. And that is why we say sometimes when you look at understanding how businesses can suffer because of internal conflicts is what we want to understand in the task 3.1. Now, when we look at the impacts of internal environment or internal things which are within the control, when I say internal means it is in your control, it is in the control of the organization or in the control of the board of the organization or managing director. Now, if decisions are taken and those decisions turn out to be wrong, then only the company is to blame, because that decision will not affect an organization outside, their working. So something is to happen within the company, or something good is to happen within the company, then everything is in their control. Now, the reverse side of this thing is, how do we understand external environment affects the organizations or businesses? Now, how do you understand this? Internal impact, what we need to do is we need to understand two frameworks here. Something called SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT stands for strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat. So when you have to look at your internal strengths, when you have to look at your internal operations and structure and everything, what you do is you employ this framework to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your organization, what could be the opportunities and threats. So strengths and weaknesses you are able to build on, because if you do not capitalize on your strength and do not remove your weaknesses, then competitions can, or your competitors can take advantage. If there are opportunities and threats that you see in the market in terms of operating, that if a retailer has dropped price and your pricing is quite high, if you don't react to that by dropping the prices of your product, that would mean you'll start losing sales. So opportunities and threats have to be negated, and again, decisions to counter the threats or look at how new areas or new places in which the business can expand is all internal to the organization. So a manager or a managing director would decide that, we are doing extremely well in one market. I think it's time for us to expand and go to another city. Now, that is a decision which the company internally takes with the board, the managing director, the employees, or at least the managers, because they feel that they are doing quite well. And if they go to another market, they see an opportunity to grab business. But if that decision is to go wrong, then that decision only affects that company because it does not affect the competitors. They are not expanding or they were already present, and that is why that is internal. So one of the key frameworks that we use to do internal analysis of your strengths and basically internal to look at analysis of your factors which affect the business internally. That means from within, you look at something called SWOT analysis. Now, in the second part, we look at how or what factors can affect the business externally. So when I talk about externally, what we are talking about is factors which can affect you and can also affect any other business. So when we talk about those factors, we need to look at things like exchange rate. For example, if your company is doing import and export of certain products, it is also done by a number of companies in that country or in that geography. If the rate of pound is to increase or decrease, it will not just affect you, but also other companies, because this is a factor which is beyond your control. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So this means that things which are outside the control of a particular organization or a company and can affect all the other companies working in that area or working in that sector, then those factors are classed as something called external factors. Is that okay? External factors could be bad weather. External factors could be, a recession in the economy, because a recession or a growth in the economy, rise in inflation, change of exchange rate, government policies, they can affect all businesses. It's not just going to affect your business. It will affect all the businesses. And that's why these, factors are called external factors. Is that okay? Now, go ahead.
No, I mean, something external factor, something that is outside, beyond your outside your company. Yeah,
yes.
Beyond your control.
Beyond your control of the company. So that is why these factors, can be classed as external factors. Now, when these factors are uncontrollable by you, that means you have very little effect or very little control on some of these factors which can affect your business. They are generally called, external factors. Now, there is another classification that we look at, which is called the micro and macro. Micro means small. Micro means from within, the things which are affecting the business from within the, the factors which affect the business from within the business itself. And that is why they are called micro. When I say macro means big or, scalable, and macro generally tends to relate to external. So when we look at how can business be affected by changes in fluctuation rate, or changes in, say, for example, exchange rate, inflation, government policy, climate, or weather, then these factors are called macro factors because they can affect not just you, but other businesses. So in this learning outcome, what we want to be able to do is learn, in this assessment criteria 3.2, we want to learn another framework. And the other framework that we are going to learn is something called PESTEL, P-E-S-T-E-L. The reason we look at PESTEL is an acronym which stands for, factors which can affect the business from outside. And these factors, when I expand PESTEL, P stands for political factor. E stands for economical factor. When we talk about S stands for social factors. And when we talk about, T stands for, technological factor. And when we talk about, L, it stands for legal factors, and E, when we look at environmental factors. So these factors which affect the organization from outside and are not in your control, but can also affect businesses or other types of, organizations, we use a framework to study these factors which affect the business. And one of the frameworks that we use to study this would be something called PEST, P-E-S-T in some cases, or PESTEL, PESTEL analysis. And this is normally used because if the company is having to adapt to, say, new legislation which the government has introduced, that means it's a political factor. If in the UK, for example, right now there's a lot of there's a lot of limbo. A lot of businesses have put off decisions because of Brexit. Now, this particular factor which is affecting the business, and not just one, but all businesses in the country, big, small, medium businesses, is a political factor because of the because of uncertainty and no certainty in terms of decisions, whether we'll remain and work with the European Union or we'll come out of European Union, is something which is being debated and discussed by the government right now. And that is why this is a political factor. If I look at, other factors which are relating to or affecting the business, one is economical factor. Now, because of the uncertainty of not knowing whether we'll get a deal or not get a deal with the European Union, a lot of businesses are either stockpiling to avert, say for example, increase in taxation or increase in prices of goods and supplies which they want to buy as raw material. They are a bit uncertain, and that is why we look at some of the factors like this. Political climate has created an uncertainty around the economic climate. Now, some in the UK, when we look at the Bank of England, is saying that if we don't get a deal, UK can be plunged into a recession. So this kind of a factor, which is predicting that it could lead to a decline in growth, overall growth in the economy, and lead to recession, is a economic factor. Similarly, we have socio-political factors, socio-legal factors, we have technological factors, we have legal factors, and we also have environmental factors. Environmental factors could be factors like when you're dealing with things like recycling, carbon emissions, corporate social responsibility, reducing the amount of waste which a lot of these retailers send to landfill, is all related to something called environmental factors. So in this particular unit, we start off with understanding how a business is created, what are the legal requirements to form a business. Now in the UK, if you have to look at forming a business or opening a company, you have to register that company with Companies House. So similarly, in your location, in your country, you will have maybe a structure wherein you can go and register a company online. And you register a company online, you are looking at either a limited company, private company, a company that at some stage will have liability limited by shares. You'll have a memorandum of understanding, and once that registration is done, the company becomes a legal entity. So how do you register companies in Nigeria?
Okay, almost the same thing. We call it Corporate Affairs and Commission.
Corporate Affairs and Commission.
Commission, yes. You go to the office and you submit your document, and when they've done the memorandum, and it will take some time for it to come out, then it will be legal company. Yes, Corporate Affairs Commission.
Right. So basically, this is something that we need to understand. So if you are looking at forming a company, how do you form a company? What is the legal status of the company? How you are going to look at the operations? What kind of legislation it will follow? The entity it will become is covered in Learning Outcome 1. After that, you look at understanding structure, key stakeholders. What are the functions of these key stakeholders? So employees are employees which work on a day-to-day function, day-to-day responsibility within the organization. Management looks at setting objectives, the strategic business plan. Shareholders, which is one of type of stakeholder. If the company is limited by shares, then people who own the shares of the company are interested in making sure that the company is making profit every year. So they are looking at or expecting to get dividend. And when you have the annual general meeting of large companies, then shareholders which have significant shareholding are invited to the AGM. And then when any law, policy, direction, or key decisions are being made, these shareholders carry crucial votes. So you have to understand the different stakeholders, and then towards the end, what we want to understand is what kind of factors can affect the working of the business or the company, and these factors could be micro or macro. Micro means internal, macro means external in most cases, and then you have to relate to both of these factors, that how you differentiate between internal and external factors and how they can impact the decision making of the company. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
Yeah. What I want to find out is the directors of the company, the directors, are they the same way with the shareholders, or they are different entities?
Well, in some cases, you can look at depending on let's put it this way, depending on the size of the company. Now, in some companies, when you look at small companies, in most cases, the director is also the owner of the company. So in those cases, you will not generally see that the director, if there is one director, he maybe owns 100% shares. If there are two or three directors, the share is split, the holding of the shares or the holding of the company is split amongst, depending on what ratio of money they've invested into the business. Now, the company, depending on the size of operation, can also have directors and non-executive directors. That means people who sit on the board of the company have some key roles and responsibility in terms of, providing some direction, working on day-to-day operations of the company, but they do not have any shareholding. So in those cases, those people will be designated as non-executive directors. Sometimes you see a discussion happening is that, okay, I'm also a director of the company, but I'm a sleeping director. Have you come across this term?
Yeah.
The reason why you call the person a sleeping director is that, yes, he has invested some money into the company, but he's not involved in the daily day-to-day operation or running of the operation of the company. So there are various ways. Sometimes you can have directors who are shareholders. Sometimes you can have director in a company which has no shareholding at all. So sometimes you will see large organizations, what they do is they bring in a person to lead the company, to lead the organization, and that person is appointed as the director within the company. But as they start to perform, after first year they get some shares, after second year they get some shares, and shares tend to be a tool which the board or the management actually uses to reward what is called performance. So employees then are able to divest or sell those shares to get disproportionate amount of money. So if you look at companies like Apple, every year Tim Cook and some of the top management in the company gets additional shares if they are able to meet those qualitative targets. So what are qualitative targets? That the company's share price rises to a certain level, or the company's market share increases if the sale of certain types of products exceeds the target set by the management. Then if these kind of qualitative goals are met, the company board also awards additional shares to the directors within the company. They are not the owner. If you see, Tim Cook is not the owner of the organization Apple. It's a public limited, it's a private company, but which is listed on stock exchange. But there are lots of different types of shareholders. There is a company or a consortium led by the visionary investor leader called ICANN. They own 4% of Apple's shares. Now there are financial institutions which have stake into Apple, but you cannot say that Tim Cook or key top management of the organization actually owns the company. No, because the organization has become so big and it has so many different types of shareholders, stakeholders, of which one of the types is shareholders. Depending on the shareholding they also have a say in the company, but they cannot claim to say that they own the company because they do not have 100% shares. So the question that you really asked, depends on how we look at which company is it, size, operation, where all does it operate, and then in terms of how many employees are there. And sometimes basis this, you will see that sometimes the small company director is the 100% shareholder because he's the only person who's invested capital. But as the company begins to expand, the company takes sources of funding from banks, financial institutions, venture capitalists, even in some cases, the owner and founder of the organization invests money into the organization, and depending on the shareholding can be split. Is that okay? Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions on this unit?
No, I'm okay.
So let's look at.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Okay.
No.
This the stakeholders. What about if an employee has a share and starts misbehaving?
So employees are also a type of stakeholder because employees are a key part of any organization. How would the functions of a company be done or day-to-day operations be done if they don't have employees? Now, a lot of organizations also, what they do is, if you're performing well, shares, when we talk about in general, is seen as a key instrument used by HR under something called reward management. Now, when I say reward management, what tends to happen is in large companies, even in small companies, let's look at companies which have limited liability or have liability limited by shares. Now, in those companies, one of the key instruments HR, the management uses is they make employees, they give shares to employees, and this is primarily given on the basis of what is called, performance. And when we look at this kind of an option being given to employees, wherein they are given some shares because they are performing well or their role in the company is quite important, or they are making significant contribution as against other employees within the organization, then in those cases, this is covered under something called ESOP. There's a technical term called Employee Stock Option Plan. So what the company tends to do in terms of its vision is that they want employees of the organization to become basically stakeholders, key stakeholders within the organization. So one of the ways they make them more involved, more loyal, more motivated to perform their functions and to achieve targets is by offering shares to the employees. Now, this can happen in any size, shape, or form of the organization, and depending on how the company policy is, when shares are awarded to employees, they are normally awarded under a context called employee stock option. That means employees have the option to buy company shares and also become stakeholders within the company. Is that okay? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other question that you have?
No.
Okay. We're just discussing. So obviously, if you have further questions, you can drop me a quick email and I can answer or, provide you some answers for those questions. Now, this particular unit, the idea is, as I mentioned to you earlier, you have to understand how a business is structured, how a business is run, who are the key players in terms of running the business, which are essentially, i.e., stakeholders, and then what kind of factors can affect the business from within internally, that means within the organization, and what factors can affect the business from outside the organization. Now, when I look at the assignment brief, if I just concentrate on this one document that you have to attempt. Now, what we've done, let me just quickly go back. Now, if you look at in the Moodle, there are lots of documents that we put primarily for you to understand, and read this unit. So some of the documents that we've got, one is Introduction to Business. Now it covers things like definition of the business, as you can see, what do businesses produce? Now business, if I define, is an entity created to make profits. How do they make profit? By selling goods and services. So if you're a financial company, you're selling a mortgage, you're selling a loan, insurance, you're selling a service. But if you are a brick and mortar company, if you're producing goods like cars, you buy grocery, for example, you buy electronics, telecom, then you are selling a physical good which allows you to, exchange and then make money. And what we wanted to do is also make you understand in terms of who are the stakeholders. Now, there are lots of different types, but we bridge them or kind of put them into 4 or 5 broad categories. So you could have employees. Employees could be managers, employees, staff, contractors, all these are employees. The other could be shareholders. Somebody who's a shareholder is a shareholder, whether you have 1 share, 2 share, 100 share, 2,000 share, doesn't matter. The third is government or legal entities. Then you have suppliers and partners. Then you have external stakeholders, which could be, customers, because they buy your products and services. And then when we expand that term, we also look at, the environment in general. So sometimes you will see government introduces legislation, which it has done in countries like Nigeria, Kenya, to say that we need to do away with use of plastic bags. So most companies which sell products and services and it's wrapped in plastics or make use of plastic bags, have to reduce that, because that is an objective which the government has set, and that objective can only be driven by introducing a legislation. So government becomes a stakeholder, but also when customers use it or ask for a plastic bag, then there's a charge which has been put, say In the UK, there is a 10p charge on a plastic bag. So if you want a plastic bag at the retailer to carry your products or what you're buying, then you have to pay 10p. So there is a charge which is being introduced from a point of view of negative commercial, levy or a commercial levy to basically dissuade customers from using plastic. So different types of stakeholders. Then we have looked at, how you look at, say, for example, one of the key things like sustainability. And then at some stage, what we also look at is that, you look at differentiating between, as I mentioned, private, public sector, the types of activities. There are 3 different types. And then there are some activities which we have included in this to try and, let's put it this way, if once you've understood the context or they've gone through the written stuff, the idea would be to try and do some of these activities just to get your concepts clear, that this is how, this is how it is going to work, or this is how it generally works. Now, when we look at classification, you have sole traders, we've looked at advantages, disadvantages, partnerships, cooperatives, different types of classification. So the presentations, primarily take you through the stuff which is related to the indicative content. And when I say this content here, is actually covered in detail in the presentations that you see on the Moodle. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, once you've read through all this, what we are going to be focused on is a document which is called the assignment brief, because you have to do an assignment to achieve this unit. And that assignment is listed here. So if I say this one is the document that I've opened up now, at this stage on the left-hand side, from the Moodle. So this particular document that we are looking at is the assignment brief. Now here, if I scroll down to the second page, it gives you what actually needs to be done. So there are 2 tasks in this assignment. Task 1 talks about creating a report, and task 2 talks about creating something called revision cards, or maybe say a PowerPoint presentation. Now, the beauty of OTHM qualifications is that they ask you to work on different types of assessment. So one of the key things that you want to do when you're doing this course is also to pick up some skills. When I say skills, what I mean by skills is that you are looking at picking up skills which are softer skills, which will help you in also understanding, say, in this case, use of PowerPoint software, looking at use of technology, looking at building, communication skills which are required for you to get into a job or a when you start working, these skills will help you in your job. So if you know computing skills, like you know how to work on Word, Excel, PowerPoint, like we are doing a webinar, these are skills which are today required in businesses when you work within organizations. So their assignments, an assignment brief, when I say, is structured into not just writing a report. That means you don't just want to write a Word document or an assignment, but it will be broken down nicely into different types of activities that you could do, and that will help you also pick up new skills. So in this first assignment, they've given you a bit of a scenario, which is saying that you are employed in BFC, which is a PLC or a public liability corporation, and you work as a business administration apprentice coordinator. Now, this company has large number of apprentices working within them at any given time. The company provides comprehensive study program, and you're required to prepare resources for the study program. So as a coordinator working within this company, you are going to be able to produce some sort of a material which can be given to new recruits or new apprentices which the company employs. And with that context in mind, you have to attempt task 1 and you have to attempt task 2. So here in task 1, it is asking you to prepare a report, and this report will actually cover all this assessment criteria. So if I just go up, task 1 of the report actually covers this particular criteria of the unit.
Okay.
So here, if I see the report must include explanation of differences between organization and business. So if you go into the presentation 1, we've given you what are the differences between the organization and the business. Then it explains, you have to explain what is the legal requirement affecting the structure of the business. That is also given. And the third is, when I say legal requirements, what do you mean by legal requirements? You mean legal requirements like how do you register a company, whether you form it as a limited company, sole trader, those kind of requirements you have to discuss. So you will discuss this from a point of view of a PLC, because what are the legal requirements for PLC is something that you will discuss here, from that aspect. An exploration of different formation options of the company. How can the company be formed? So here we are talking about sole trader, partnership, all the different types that you can look at, and that has to be summarized here, to cover this task. And the last one it says is description of how legal structures of business varies across public and private sector. So here, when I say description, and you can guess the word, it says legal structure. So what you have to do is you have to explain the different types of structure of the organization: hierarchical, functional, matrix, flat structure, or divisional structure. And you have to take example and then draw those structures out, and that will basically look at accomplishing, this particular report. Is that okay? Now, in the second task, you're looking at, you're creating something called small documents on 1 or 2 pages, essentially like a revision card. Revision cards are, you must have seen across revision cards when you try and learn a new language. Sometimes what you get is you get revision cards from the market, which are like a deck. You have a, card. When I say it says a sentence on the top and you flip it over, it gives the same translation of that sentence in a language. So if I look at French, which my kids are currently learning, and if I look at their revision cards, so the front of the card would say English, how are you? And the back of the card would say ça va. That would mean they need to translate it, then they can see the answer at the back. So when I say literally you have to produce revision cards, you don't need to do those cards literally, but what you're going to do is produce a Word document or a report, something like this. If I just say you produce a document, something like this, and this document, when I say task 2, and here the first task is saying description of how businesses and objectives. So you write this task here, and then you answer the task at the bottom, and then you go to the second page. If I look at going into the second page, you copy this task, the type of different stakeholders, and then you explain that. Then you go to the third page. You're basically doing this task on a page-wise basis. Now, this particular revision report needs to have an indicative word count of 2,500. That means when you use the task 2, this is going to be about 2,500 words minimum. Is that okay? So here,
so all the
yeah. So here it is asking you to say description of how businesses are organized, purpose and objectives. So you're basically going to be talking about, the objectives, which is social enterprise. You're looking at, the main objectives of how businesses are formed. Whether you're forming a charity, a cooperative, a public limited company, a private company, what are the objectives? You're going to talk about this. So it's given in the presentation that we have created in this, and it is clearly there. And the second one would be description of relationship between organizational structure and functional. So the structures, the different types that we are talking about, matrix, divisional, functional, those structures. When I say legal structure, here you're looking at company formation, private limited, public limited, sole trader, that structure you're talking. But when I talk about organizational structure, you're talking about the different types of structures that you see within organization that we looked at, these kind of structures. Okay. Then explanation of impact of internal in business environment. So here you're looking at a company. If you feel that this is something not very specific, you can take a company of your choice, and you can discuss what are the internal factors. Say within a company in Nigeria where you are, you could pick up one organization and talk about how the internal factors are affecting business environment, is the micro environment is actually affecting the business. And in the second part of it, you're discussing how the macro or external factors are affecting that business. And then towards the end, what I would suggest is if you do a small table, like a table on the Word document. So if I look at a table on the Word document, in order to look at this particular task, so what you could do is basically do a table here, which is a table like this, and here you basically put the topic, and here you put internal factors, and here you put external factors. So basically you can discuss some of the factors here. So internal factors, you could, when I look at internal factors in particular, here I could look at, say, for example, employees. I could basically, so here I would say stakeholders,
Okay.
and internal, that is an internal factor which could affect how it will affect, you'll describe here. External factors could be, when you're looking at taking, say, pestle, political factors. So some of the factors that you can take is political. In the next one, you can take, say, for example, technological. Not all, you don't need to go and explain all the factors in terms of all the pestle. You could look at legal
Okay.
factors, and that would, how it will affect internal and how it will affect external. You could also look at, for example, a bit of SWOT analysis, and it will primarily be affecting the internal one here rather than the external. So external will only be basically threats. So here it will be threats which you might discuss, and here you might discuss the SWOT, which is strength, weaknesses, and opportunities. And that table would do as far as this task is concerned. So in terms of the submission of the report, it shows that they're asking you to make a report here, and it is saying you need to make some word process revision cards. That means here, like I've suggested, one pager for each of the tasks, will be actually like a revision card, and that would complete, this unit. So this assignment, when you look at, when you look at submitting the assignment to us, maybe you do a bit of introduction, a table of content, like for example, showing you, and at some stage, what you do towards the end is also look at, drawing up a table within the end of the document, which is to show the references, where you have taken the data from. So here you will do is references. So references could be websites, it could be books, it could be journals, it could be, articles that you've taken, and those kind of things would actually come in as references. And then at some stage, you format the document, put page numbers in, you can put your, unit name on the top, which is Introduction to Business. So I'll put Introduction to Business. You can put your name here. So we know that this is, and then assuming once you've done this, you draw up a table of reference, which is to, provide, say, for example, the, this basically is a professionally formatted document, which is like an assignment. So here you could also start off. So when I say, you could have something like task 1. Before task 1, you could do a bit of introduction, and then towards the end, what you have learned from the assignment, a conclusion. So maybe conclusion 30 to 50 words if you want to write, and then similarly about 30 to 50 words, sort of an introduction. And this introduction, basically shows in your own words what's your understanding of, the unit, and what you've learned towards the end can be summarized in terms of introduction. So this becomes, a kind of a formatted document that you will submit. And when you submit this document, you send it to us on learner work. So when you send this work document to this email address, you will receive an auto acknowledgement, and one of the assessors, of the unit, say for example, in this case, is most probably going to be me. I'll pick this up. I'll do some, I'll go through your document, and if I feel that the document is fine, I'm going to give you some comments saying that, okay, if I just delete that here, I'll look at, say for example, task 2. I'll look at this task, for example, and I feel, okay, this has been achieved. We'll give you some comments like this achieved. If I feel that, okay, you have not covered this task adequately, so I will say, okay, you need to elaborate, and include, we'll give you some comments, elaborate and include the following. So I will give you some tips in terms of what needs to be included, 1, 2, 3, and once you complete and resubmit that. So for example, here, just very briefly, to give you an example, I'm just going to randomly put some text in. So assuming you've written this and we still feel that, the assignment is not meeting. So when you resubmit by including these comments, what you do is you shade them in yellow, that this is something new that you've added. And when you send the document back to me again, I'll check it. If I feel that it has met the criteria now, at some stage, what I'm going to do is basically say, okay, your assignment is now complete. And what you're going to get, will be a sheet like this. If I just show you an example, it will be a summative sheet and it'll say why you've achieved all these tasks. Will be some comments on it. And then, towards the end, what I'll do is I'll end up signing the sheet and say, okay, that is all fine. And, this unit is now complete.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay.
If you have any questions or if you feel that you still need, some material, or if you have any doubts, you just feel free to drop me or Samit an email, who's the course coordinator. And what we can do is we can do another session, with regards to clarifying that doubt or, giving some additional information. So you can send me an email on LearnerWork. And what tends to happen is when learners send the email to LearnerWork, the relevant tutor who's actually teaching the, unit will actually pick it up and, will reply, and you will basically get a quick response from the tutor to say that, okay, this is what it is, this is what it is. And, we are going to, send you some additional material or something to study, which will help you to complete that task.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions at this stage?
No. So when I'm making the reference, I need to put the page and the year of the author or where I got the information from?
That's correct. So when you look at Harvard referencing, this particular presentation, if you open up, there are 3 ways to look at doing referencing. Normally, what I would suggest you to do is, when you look at Harvard referencing, this is more or less followed, in the UK for all qualifications. So there are 3 ways that you can do referencing. One is using citation. The second is using quotes. And the third is using paraphrasing. Okay. Now, citation means you are basically taking something which has been mentioned in a book, article, and you put them in inverted quotes. Okay. So if you pick up, say, definition, if you pick up a definition, in particular of a business, and if it's been say given out by an author, and you bring that definition, you put it in quotes, and then towards the end, what you do is you put the name of the author, and then you put the date or the year in which it has been done, and then in some cases that would be good enough. Now, if you're picking up quotes, you are basically looking at putting, say, you pick up definition of marketing, and definition of marketing as per American Marketing Association is, then you put that in quotes, close the quotes, and then towards the end you put AMA, 2019. Okay. Now, third would be you look at the definition of American, marketing, but you write it in your own words, right? So that is paraphrasing. Now, when you look at referencing this into something called a bibliography or a list towards the end of your, assignment. So here, what will happen is normally you use referencing from academic books. There is second, which is you use maybe journals, and the third is when you use websites. So in the case of if I use, say, for example, a website, I was looking at Tesco, for example. If you take that as an example, so what will happen is that if you've taken or talked about Tesco in general, about, say, you've talked about Tesco banking, so what you will do is, if I pick this up, somewhere what you've written here, you must have mentioned. So here in that context, you'll just mention Tesco 2019. But when I reference it in the bibliography, what I'm going to do is put the full, link of the website, tesco.com, and then I would say accessed on. So I'm accessing the website today, which is 9th June 2019. And that will come in something called the square brackets. So this will be the bibliography towards the end. it will say Tesco.com, and what I've accessed primarily is Tesco Mobile, Tesco Bank, and that has been taken from, this particular link on the Tesco website. It was accessed on 9th of June 2019. If you have, a reference that you're picking up from a book, so obviously the book reference will have, Harvard referencing what is Harvard referencing? It's called author, date, style referencing, essentially. That means the name of the author comes, comma, followed by the name or the date on which the publication has been done. So if you take a reference from, say, an academic book, here you might put, I'm just saying, Hachinsky, say, for example, or so let's say Kotler. So I've taken the book, which is, Kotler et al. That means Kotler has written the book, he's a marketing guru, but there are some other contributors to the book as well. And the book which has been taken is, Principles of Marketing, and it was published in 2019. And then what you do is, if there are other authors, you will basically include it here by comma, and then say the name of the book and when it was published. Now, when you look at academic book, you also put something called page number, PP. So I have referred page number 430, for example, or 431. So you mention that in the reference in the book, in the detail. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah.
Now, what you might have to do is, I'm going through it like maybe quite fast, but my suggestion would be, if you go through this critical presentation, which is 15, 16 slides, it will tell you how to reference each of the things. So when you're looking at putting a reference from the book, it says author name has to come, when the year of the publishing of the book, the title of the book has to come. And if there are other editions, for example, now Principles of Marketing, which has been published by Kotler, is actually, has, I think maybe the 24th edition or 23rd edition is current. And then also, in some cases, what happens is it also has the name of the publisher, Tata McGraw-Hill. So name of the publisher also comes, but here, when I say this bit would be in brackets, right? And the name of the publisher. So this is the, say, third or fourth edition, third edition, and then it is published in 2019. So basically what will happen is, you'll start with the name of the author, you'll mention the name of the book, what exact pages you have taken it from, then you put the name of the publisher, and then what edition it is and which year it was actually published. So it explains this here. Then you go to the journal, pretty much the same. And then when you go to electronic resources, which include websites, articles, published resources, magazines. So here you have to put the full, hyperlink of the web address, and it was assessed. And we've given you some examples in terms of, how direct quotes and quotations can be, used. And when you're doing that, this is how it needs to be presented and how the referencing needs to be, actually done.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, okay.
So maybe and the other thing which I would suggest is, when you look at the assignments, and you do your assignment, we are looking at least putting 6 references, which is a minimum requirement. So 6 references have to be definitely put when you finish a particular work.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
So if you have any questions, do let me know, and you can send them by email pretty much, or ask for another session. That is not a problem. We can do a tutorial at a day's notice. Not an issue or a problem with that at all. And if you need any specific topic, any specific detail that you're struggling on, you can just copy and paste that particular task. You can send an email to LearnerWork, and then somebody will definitely respond within 2 hours to say, okay, here we go. This is what the task is asking you to do. Here's some additional reading material. When we give you some additional reading material, we're not going to give you a book to read. We're not giving you 50 pages to read. You'll probably end up getting something which is 1 or 2 pages, but those are bits that you have to paraphrase and write in your own words in the assignment, rather than copy and paste what we was exactly given, in order to avoid plagiarism. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Good stuff. So if you want this particular document, I can send this across to you just as a ready reference in terms of how to, look at starting, what do you call the assignment, and this could be, a template that you could end up using, for doing the assignment.
Yeah, I can help you to send it. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I can send it to you now, no problem.
Okay.
And what we will do is, once you are, I know that you are doing this particular unit right now, so I'm going to try and, what do you call, align another session for next week, same time, so that we can actually catch up on, what we are actually discussing today.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
That's fine. So I will take leave and I'll end the session today. I'll send you this document right away so that you have the draft for following as a template.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll catch up with you next week.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.
All right. Bye.